Trump just made the most calculated geopolitical move of his presidency. 2 hours ago, the White House announced a full suspension of joint defense procurement agreements with Canada. Not a renegotiation, a complete suspension. Every shared military contract, every cooperative weapons program, every joint Arctic surveillance operation frozen indefinitely. Billions in defense spending that used to flow north just stopped. The justification, allied burden sharing failures. The real reason Carney refused to meet the 3% NATO spending deadline that expired last week. The announcement has 3 core components. First, all joint defense contracts with Canadian manufacturers are suspended immediately. Over 850 Canadian firms supply components for the F-35 program, naval shipbuilding, and satellite systems. Everyone just lost their biggest client overnight. Second, American military personnel at joint Canadian facilities begin withdrawal within 30 days. NORAD operations transition to American-only oversight. Third, intelligence sharing between Washington and Ottawa drops to the lowest tier. Canada no longer receives real-time threat assessments covering its own Arctic territory. The White House expected Carney to fold immediately and quietly meet the spending target. But before we get into what actually happened, if you appreciate this kind of analysis, hit that subscribe button and like this video so you never miss a story like this. Now, here is what Carney actually did. 1 hour later, Carney held a nationally televised press conference. He opened with a rehearsed line. Canada's sovereignty is not for sale, and our defense is not contingent on American approval. Then he announced 4 retaliatory measures. Each one sounded powerful. Each one is already crumbling. First, Canada is expelling all American military advisors and canceling joint training exercises. Over 2,000 American personnel operate at Canadian facilities. Carney gave them 14 days to leave. The problem is, well, Canada cannot operate its own defense systems without them. Arctic radar installations were designed, built, and maintained by American contractors. Without those technicians, the systems degrade within months. Carney kicked out the only people keeping his northern defenses functional. Second, a $14 billion emergency defense spending package funded by cutting infrastructure and healthcare. Defense analysts called it panic spending. Canada lacks domestic capacity to build fighter jets or surveillance systems. Equipment must come from European manufacturers at premium prices with delivery timelines stretching 5 to 8 years. For half a decade, Canada gets weaker, not stronger. Third, American companies are permanently excluded from future Canadian military procurement. Sounds like punishment until you examine the cost. NATO interoperability runs on American systems. 90% of Canadian forces operate on American platforms. Every European alternative creates compatibility nightmares. Canadian soldiers will field equipment that cannot communicate with their own existing systems. Fourth, independent Arctic patrols without American coordination. Carney declared, "The Arctic is Canadian. We do not need Washington's permission to defend our own territory." There was a standing ovation, flags waved, just, beautiful theater. But here is reality. Canada has 4 Arctic-capable naval vessels. The United States has 34. Russia has over 40. Carney announced independent Arctic defense with a navy that honestly cannot cover even 10% of the coastline it claims to protect. Now, here is why Ottawa is panicking and Washington is not. The suspension exposed what Carney has been hiding. Canada has received American-level security at Canadian-level prices for 6 decades. The radar, the satellites, the nuclear umbrella, all American, all free, all just taken for granted. Trump just sent the bill. Carney cannot pay it. His $14 billion package barely covers 1 year of what America provides for free. And well, it delivers 0 capability for 5 years. That is a half-decade window where Canada is dangerously exposed, and every adversary with Arctic ambitions knows it. The Canadian defense establishment turned on him within hours. A retired chief of defense staff went on national television saying the Prime Minister made a decision based on pride, not security, and that Canada is less safe. Tonight, 3 former defense ministers warned that expelling American advisors creates vulnerabilities Canada cannot fill. The defense industry warned of 40,000 job losses since most Canadian defense workers are employed by American firms. These are Canadian leaders telling their own Prime Minister he made their country less safe to win a news cycle. The markets confirmed it. The Canadian dollar, well, it dropped by 3.2% within just an hour and a half. The Toronto Stock Exchange fell by 4.7%, marking its worst day in 3 years. Foreign investors honestly saw instability, not strength. Capital fled Canadian markets immediately. Meanwhile, American defense stocks surged. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, all of them climbed sharply. Wall Street decided that lost Canadian revenue would simply redirect to Poland, Japan, Australia, and South Korea. All of these countries are expanding their defense budgets. All are desperate for American equipment. Canada was a customer, but never the only one. The international reaction, frankly, buried Ottawa even further. NATO's Secretary General called for continued commitment to alliance spending obligations. That's diplomatic code for, well, pay your bills. The United Kingdom expressed concern, but made sure to protect its own $7.8 billion American defense deal. France stepped in, offering to sell Canada fighter jets. That wasn't solidarity. It was salesmanship targeting a desperate buyer. Not a single allied nation offered concrete security guarantees. Not one volunteered to defend Canadian Arctic territory because in the end, only America can. So where does this go from here? Carney has 3 paths. He could maintain retaliation and watch defense capabilities deteriorate for 18 months, while Russia and China expand their presence in the Arctic. That would mean facing these threats with just 4 ships and decaying radar systems that honestly nobody in Canada even knows how to fix. He could quietly reverse course, meet the 3% target, and accept that free American protection is over. But after the sovereignty speech and that standing ovation, that sort of political humiliation could easily end his career. Or he could escalate against a superpower that outspends the next 10 countries combined. But escalation, let's be honest, is not available to a country whose entire security architecture was built by the very nation it just antagonized. Every option really hurts Carney more than Trump. The White House has stated that Canada must commit to 3% before talks even begin. Carney must concede before negotiations even start. Just 2 hours ago, Carney thought his press conference declared independence. 2 hours later, Ottawa is learning that independence costs more than Canada afford. Trump wanted fair burden sharing. Carney wanted to prove Canada doesn't need America. But every measure he announced proved exactly the opposite. Carney is not thinking ahead. He's reacting emotionally to a president who planned for exactly that reaction. Washington isn't chasing Canada. It's waiting. Canada always comes back to the table. If this opened your eyes, smash that like button, share it, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens.